So we'll talk about what we're actually seemingly experts in, and that's player development in the NIL era. So many people have obviously talked about how NIL has changed the sport. Transfer portal, free transfers in terms of multiple times if you'd like to. Obviously, you'll have a mid-major player that breaks out in a certain conference and kicks up to a higher level because his financial opportunities are going to be much larger, and all of those things that have changed. And people talk ad nauseum about how it's changed the roster construction of the sport, but nobody talks about how it's changed player development. And I think that's something that even from the conversations we've had on record, off record, that coaches are still working their brain around because it's still fresh and new. But in your perspective, what's the main thing that's changed in player development in the modern age where there is free market movement, where there is money being involved in all of the factors that is modern college athletics?
I think traditionally, when you thought about player development and you thought about player evaluation, more importantly, I don't know if you've ever read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, but those habits is begin with the end in mind, and that's kind of what a lot of times in recruiting and player evaluation, and when you look at a player development track, that's kind of how you went about it, right? And that's how you do go about it is you think about what this guy can turn into, its projection, and then you have to build a roadmap that takes a bunch of different turns throughout the years and due to changing external factors for that player. And you would think typically 3 to 4 years down the road would be a lot of what you were doing in your player evaluation, especially if you're in the high school recruiting landscape, right? You're recruiting a high school kid who may be a junior, and you like to think 3 to 4 years down the road till he's a sophomore, junior in your program, and what he can turn into with growth factors, with whatever the player development track you think he needs is. Whether if he's a pitcher, it's like adding muscle mass to add velocity, developing new pitches. If it's a hitter, swing adjustments as he grows into his body a little more from 17 years old to 21. And obviously the huge changes that people just make throughout that time, in general, their growth, their maturity, and all that. Now it's beginning with the end in mind. When you player evaluate, like, a lot of times you have to think of the here and now. What can they do for me this year? If you're at a smaller program, a lot of times you would get guys that needed a lot of development, maybe undersized, maybe a little underskilled, because those are the kids that you could recruit. Those are the kids you were able to get into the door at your program. And obviously all this is nuanced and is case by case, but just from a 10,000 foot view, that was kind of the way you would have to go about it. And now it's like, what can this player do for me this year? Because if I think 2-3 years down the road, he might not be in our program, right? He might not be a guy that sticks around, because if we develop him really well, he could leave us. He could get a payment opportunity, a money opportunity. He could want to go somewhere to that gets more a higher draft grade, programs that get a higher draft grade in a bigger conference. And if you're at a bigger school, do you want to invest years on a high school guy when you can go in the portal and get a kid who's 21 years old? No, you probably want a kid who's going to come in, and the chances of him pitching as a freshman or being in your lineup as a freshman are pretty high, because if not, I can go get a 21-year-old out of the free agent market that is the transfer portal nowadays.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you mentioned it there. You look at close your eyes and imagine what college athletics playing trajectory is, right? And there was a point in time where Randy Moss was a freshman at Florida State and he was only allowed to be on the practice squad because he was a freshman, right? Because there was so much long-term perspective on how those guys develop, right? And what they develop into as players and all of those factors that come into play, right? So we look at what the 90s perspective of, player development was in all of college athletics. And it's you sit as a freshman, you learn, you develop physically. Sophomore year, number two, you're backing up somebody who's been in the program for multiple years. You're in a position to maybe get some spot starts, fill in during some injuries, play some other positions, some pinch hitting opportunities. Year 3, you're a starter. All right. Maybe you're hitting in the bottom of the order, but you're a starter. And then year 4 is obviously your opportunity to break out and have your historically good all conference season. That's like the all American dream of college athletics. Well, now we fast forward to the modern age of college athletics, and it's a sprint, right? How quickly can we get these guys to be productive? How quickly can we get these guys on the field? How quickly can they be a valuable asset to our roster? And that's the balance of what these programs are. And I think, again, I factor it in for, there's two sides of this, right? There's the Power Four programs who can go out and acquire the talent that's had the player development structure at another university and another program to enhance their roster. And they can afford to have backups that are making really good money and just go steal that kid from another roster and give them an opportunity. And then there's the mid-major programs that have to understand that there is a balance in still acquiring the 18-year-old and giving him a developmental structure, hoping that he develops into something that's really productive and really good, but not too productive and too good so that he's out the door and leaving you high and dry where you're trying to find a replacement for that player. So it just creates this, sprint, as I mentioned, to what these players are going to be on the field. And that's not even to mention the 35 roster decrease. And now there's a lot of flexibility around that 35 number. When it was published and everybody was talking about that number, it seemed like it was set in stone, hard line 39. Well, with designated student athletes and all these things, we basically have glorified unlimited rosters, trust me. So that's a factor in it as well. But the main thing to say there is, as rosters have condensed, as player development has accelerated, not just in the resources we have, but also the timelines that we have, it's now at a point where coaches really have to bear down on how can we get this person productive on this calendar year and maybe not even look beyond that, right? Do we think this freshman is physically good enough to give us some playing time, but he could really take a stride if we put him on the back burner and developed him and seasoned him and marinated his player development structure, and next year he's a guy? I don't think that's in the cards for most programs right now. It's like, if this kid is like 8 or 9 in terms of our starting roster and offensively, he's playing, because there's no like, it's like we either need to see if he's good enough, he's got it, and figure out what it is from there, or he's not good enough and we're going to try to replace him in the offseason anyway.
Yeah, and there's just so many different ways you can go. Like, I think one of the points you made there, like, I think if you're a school who maybe doesn't have the NIL budget, or I don't want to just group all of the mid majors into one, but if you're, for lack of a better way to kind of separate these programs, I don't think you can go into it and say we don't want to make this guy too good because we'll lose him. Like, you just have to do what you
no,
do,
definitely,
and right, like, and just like get the most out of the guys. And if they leave, it's unfortunate, but trust that, hey, we made this kid better, we can make the next one better. And that is a tough place to be. Obviously, is a lot more simple when there wasn't player movement the way it was, and you knew that these guys would stay in your program for 4 years. But I also think it kind of changes how you have to approach player development as a coaching staff when you look at like each individual player. And if this guy's ceiling is X, we might have to focus on Y and get, develop the things that can make them productive today. And not, because there were like when you had unlimited, when you had bigger rosters and you had, again, the confidence that this person, this kid was going to be in your program for 3 to 4 years, you could put them on a developmental track where they're reaching their ceiling in year 3. And so maybe that's working on, like I said, X, Y, and Z. Now you have to focus on A, B, and C to get them to be productive today, because you need them to produce, like you said. If they're, fringe or even just behind, no, we need to work on the things that, like, okay, just from a pitching standpoint, if it's like, if we just, maybe, arming you with more velocity and putting more mass on and then changing the shape of your breaking ball is going to make you the best pitcher that we think you can be. That a weekend guy that's going to go out there and be able to start for us. We don't have the time to do that. We just need you to change your slider shape a little bit and throw it 70% of the time and work out of our bullpen because we need you this year. And so what that causes is, instead of, being able to kind of go through the trials and tribulations of that development process that would get you to be that weekend guy on the mound. We now have to just have you focus on, that slider shape, working on those little things, maximizing what you do right now well, so that you can pitch for us today. And that certainly changes the way that you have to look at your roster, especially, and how you look at what, the best development track for each guy is. And instead of being able to kind of put guys on the back burner, or, maybe not expose them to, high leverage situations while they develop those things, you now have to develop them while they're exposing those things, which then adds in all these other factors, which is, it's really hard for, college age players to not be results oriented, which I feel like we now say once a week on here, right? Is like they, just the mental makeup of these guys. And it's completely understandable. But like now you're adding in, okay, we need you to develop while you play, right? And you've heard this from, some big league organizations use this term all the time, right? Develop while he's in the big leagues, right? Talking about bringing young players up maybe sooner than you would like, and have them develop while they're in the everyday lineup at the major league level. That can, some guys can do that really well, and some guys that crushes, right? And that's why you see different major league organizations have different philosophies on whether or not they're going to do that. Some are really patient and they don't call up their guy, their top prospects till they're absolutely ready. Some smaller market major league teams who need the help and need the impact right away, they bring those guys up as soon as they show any glimpse of like, hey, they might be able to handle this at the big league level. And then they hope that going through the tribulations of being on that stage every single day in the lineup every day with all the attention and eyeballs, they can work their way through it. It's kind of shifting to a similar idea at the college level, depending on what program you're at, where it's like, hey, you're good enough to be here every day. You're not the player that we need you to be, but you're good enough to maybe, give us innings on the mound or be in our lineup, 2 to 3 times a week. We need you to do it. And we're going to have to just ride the highs and lows that are come with you being a young player who's not at his peak potential.